Now, for our next panel, I've personally had this one marked on my schedule all day, as one of the panelists works at a company I had the privilege to intern with last summer. Excuse me. We'll go over the end product of resource extraction and how it is often what captures the public's attention. But by the cleanup and the restoration of extraction sites, though less visible, is just as critical. So these efforts play a vital role in safeguarding the environment and ensuring the longevity, sustainability, and credibility of the industry. And to help us expand our knowledge on this phase of resource, please welcome moderator Brian Mueller, the Interim Associate Dean and Director of the Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station.
My goodness, thank you so much. Had I known I was going to be following Governor Gordon, I would have spent more time with Steve Smutko working on my negotiation skills to get a different slot on the agenda. Governor, thank you for your remarks. I personally appreciate your commitment to ag and natural resources in the state and all that you've done for us for a number of years, and including me personally, even before you've gotten into the office that you've in now. So thank you for that. So I currently serve as an interim associate dean in the Wyoming Ag Experiment Station here on campus. When I fly on airplanes and have a discussion with people that are sitting next to me and they ask me what it is that I do, I kind of summarize it by saying that I help people fix broken rangelands. So my professional training is really in rangeland restoration ecology, weed science, and range management. And I've had the pleasure of helping a number of folks, not just around the state of Wyoming, but around the western U.S., develop and implement strategies and tactics to help recover some of those lost structure or functions from a number of different stressors that impact our rangeland ecosystems. And what I mean by that is at some point, those systems are unable to absorb more disturbance or more stressors, and we've crossed over some ability that they cannot recover on their own. And so active restoration or reclamation to get those ecosystem goods and services back is really something that the University of Wyoming and our partners at the state of Wyoming are really good at. And it sounds like we've been kind of patting ourselves on the back all morning to some extent, but the state of Wyoming is nationally recognized for our reclamation, remediation, and restoration prowess. And I'll ask my fellow panelists to come on up and join me as I talk about that a little bit more. You guys come on up and take your seats. There's detailed intros and bios for each of these gentlemen that are coming up to the stage now. I would encourage you to look at those. We're going to take a little bit of a different tactic and allow them to introduce themselves. As they do that, you're going to hear another theme again that keeps coming up for much of today, and that's that trade-off and the balance between energy resources and agricultural and renewable natural resources. I thought maybe we were going to see a wrestling match this morning between Scott and Kelly. I grew up in North Georgia. We call it wrestling in North Georgia. And I think about these gentlemen here wrestle with some difficult topics in their daily positions. And so in many cases, we can do all the things that science tells us to do. We can do all the things that our experience tells us to do. And the final results when we're working with natural systems sometimes depends on things like whether it rains or not when we need it to rain. And so there is a certain amount of effort that goes into all of these restoration activities, but there's also sort of a certain amount of humility that gets built into us, knowing that we are struggling with natural systems that are somewhat beyond our control. And that's going to partially guide some of the things that we're talking about in our discussion today. Some excellent questions submitted by the students for this panel as well. We're going to work through a series of those and hopefully have some more time at the end to address some additional questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I've got the controller here. Hopefully I won't mess up what's already been a great conference. And if I move ahead too far on the slides, just tell me. So Grayson, we'll start with you and just work our way down the line.
Excellent. Thank you so much. How's everyone doing? My name is Grayson Buckingham, President and CEO of DISA Technologies. And I was talking to Brian earlier, and it's amazing to be here. He was asking about the origin story of DISA, and it actually started in this room in 2017. My co-founder and I were doing our MBA at the University of Wyoming together, and we decided to participate in the Elbogen competition. And we were fortunate enough to win that competition, and then we won some other, the Kickstart grant, the Casper Challenge, and had some non-dilutive funding, and said, okay, you know what, let's leave our jobs, let's pursue this as a full-time gig. And we had some free incubator space up in Casper, and grinded it out for several years, 3 years without even taking a salary. And fast forward to today, it's been an amazing journey. If we can go to the next slide. We're currently sitting at 65 employees. The vast majority of those employees are based in Casper, Wyoming. In addition, we're backed by very strong institutional investors. We've raised $83 million in private capital. And just want to give a shout out to the Wyoming Energy Authority. We were fortunate enough to receive an investment from the Wyoming Energy Authority, and then within 12 months from that, we raised $55 million. And those come from major back groups, including Constellation Energy, who operates 23 nuclear reactors. They buy $2 billion worth of uranium every year. BHP, the world's largest mining entity. Valor Equity Partners, they led the rounds in SpaceX and Tesla, as well as Evoke Innovations, who has Rio Tinto, Vale, and Mitsubishi. It's been really fun to do that because when we started the company, Wyoming ranked 49th in access to capital. And so I think, for the students out there, hopefully this can help encourage you that you can raise money in Wyoming. We've got investors from San Francisco, New York, Vancouver, and just by pursuing our ideal, and now we're doing a lot of fun work. So we're really focused. We've got a core technology called high pressure slurry ablation, HPSA for short, and it's used in two major applications. One's in mineral processing, so we break rocks apart more efficiently. Globally, we consume about 4% of global electricity is used just to break rocks apart. So we're a more energy efficient way. And so we've got units in copper mines, graphite, phosphate from Australia, Brazil, Mexico, US, Canada, in these flow sheets. And then what I'm excited to talk more about today is we're the only EPA validated technology and Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensed technology that can remediate abandoned uranium mines. A lot of people don't know, but the EPA estimates there's about 15,000 abandoned uranium mines that are mostly in the West. And so we're actively working to remediate those sites and recover the uranium from those sites and put that to productive use. So, and yeah, just, key highlights. It's, last year has been fun. 2 years ago, we were at 8 employees. Now we're at 65. So we're hiring quickly. We've had a C. Bison here and Colton, interns for us, and, the rest of the DISA team. So we've been hiring very quickly. Any students that are interested in an internship, please reach out, especially to Fred, sitting right over there. But it's been a fun year of progress, and so we finally reached that commercialization phase where we started out, they call it TRL levels, technology readiness levels. We started out at a 1, and now we're at a 9, and so it's a lot of fast growth, and a lot of exciting things happening right out of here in Casper, Wyoming.
Thank you, Grayson. Tim.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tim Hosel. I work with the Department of the Interior's Office of Restoration and Damage Assessment. And part of what I do is to lead the Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration Program. The mission of that program is to restore natural resources and ecosystem services after an oil spill or a hazardous substance release. And we conduct these damage assessments to determine the type and amount of restoration that would offset that injury. For an example, the most prominent case that we have is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. What the NERDAR program operates under CERCLA, so Superfund, Oil Pollution Act, Clean Water Act, National Marine Sanctuaries Act on our coast, and the System Unit Resource Protection Act, and that's mainly at National Park Service sites. The natural resources that we consider are air, water, soil, sediment, biota, and lost uses from recreational or cultural applications. And I'll say that trustees that can bring these claims are not just the federal government. It also includes states and tribal governments, and we work in concert to do this together. All of our decisions are consensus-based. And I'll note that up here on the slide there's a link that you probably can't click on, but you can Google NerdR YouTube and go to a 2-minute explainer of this. It's a nice animated video, so I'd suggest you check that out. Next slide, please. So on the left here, I have a list of the trustees that are typically involved in these natural resource damage assessment and restoration cases. So we have the Department of Interior, my department, NOAA, so for most of our marine resources, states and tribes, and a long list of the types of natural resources that we pursue injury claims for. And these range from endangered species to recreational uses, such as fishing or boating, and from groundwater contamination to cultural uses that tribal nations seek to claim. So we always want to highlight that our process remains focused on restoration. We really we look at what are the injuries and what would offset those injuries. We don't do this really in a dollar-based value. We do it on units of that habitat or that resource. And we consider what was not replaced through reclamation or remediation. So we let that process play out and then consider over that time period whether we need to even bring a claim forward. So, and that kind of brings me to the bottom figure on here, that the process here, this phase 1, the pre-assessment, we seek to find out, well, is there even a claim? And oftentimes we investigate this and we decide, no, this isn't worth pursuing. But for those that there are, we move on to phase 2, which is an injury assessment, where we look at which natural resources were injured and what restoration would offset that, and then come to some type of agreement through consent decree for a dollar value that goes into determination for what restoration will take place, and we plan that out, and we implement and we monitor that in typically the same geographic area, as well as the exact same resources that were impacted.
Thank you, Tim. Next, we'll go to Josh Oakley.
Howdy, y'all. Thanks for inviting me here today. It's quite an honor to be here and speak to y'all, and thanks to the folks who encouraged my invitation. Josh Oakley, Lander native. I work for the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality with the Abandoned Mineland Division. I'm a project manager, and I like to say that I specialize in growing diverse native vegetation communities on drastically disturbed soils from seed. And have great bosses that allow me the latitude to work with stakeholders across the state. So from Game and Fish to the BLM to the Forest Service, and I spent all day yesterday teaching to Dr. Beck's classes here on campus. So thanks for having me, and I'll pass it off to Josh.
Thanks, Josh. I am Josh Sorensen. I'm the Reclamation Manager for Jonah Energy. I'm originally from Riverton. When I graduated from high school in Riverton, at the time, if you went to CWC, they would cover your education. So, me being as fiscally conservative as I am, I went to CWC. From CWC, I came to UW, and I came to UW for the same reason. At that time, the top 10 people with their GPA, if they transferred from CWC, they would get a presidential scholarship at UW. There must have only been 6, because somehow I got a presidential scholarship to come to UW. I received a bachelor's degree from the University of Wyoming and from the College of Ag. When I was done with that, I wasn't ready to work, so I applied for some assistantships. I was offered one here at UW, I was offered one at Montana State, and I was offered one at Texas A&M. And for reasons unknown to me to this date, I went to Texas A&M. But it was a good opportunity because I was able to gain a different perspective. When I graduated with a master's degree from Texas A&M, my thesis was 37 pages. That included all the cover pages and everything in between. I think I had the shortest one in the rangeland department. It was also probably the worst one that was written. I thought it was great, but then I read it a few years ago and like, that's a train wreck. I don't know how they let me out of here. Following that, I hopped in a semi. And my parents were really impressed with me. Here I am with a master's degree, and I'm driving a semi on Wyoming highways. We only need to do that a couple years to realize that when the wind blows and the roads are rotten, it's not a whole lot of fun. And I would let all the air out of my seat to try and lower the weight of the truck so it wouldn't blow over. Like, that would do a whole lot of good. Anyway, like I said, after a couple years, I went to the Forest Service, and I did that for 5 or 6 years. And I enjoyed my time with the Forest Service, but an opportunity came with Encana. And they asked if I would like to do some habitat restoration on the Jonah field, and I considered it and decided to jump ship. Now, my job right now with Jonah Energy is to restore lands that have been disturbed by energy development. And I enjoy it. It's great. My objective is to restore those lands so that they are self-sustaining, so that after I put an input in one time, I don't have to go back and put another input in again. I do that for wildlife habitat, I do that for agriculture, and I do that for the landscape. If I can improve the landscape for wildlife, more wildlife are able to utilize it. They're able to be more successful on it. We're able to mitigate our damages through energy development. I do it for agriculture. If I can improve the forage on the landscape, we have the potential to increase the number of animal units on that landscape. And from that, we have the potential to increase our economic gain from that landscape. So as I'm driving throughout the country, I am always looking at landscapes, I'm always looking at habitats and environments, and I'm thinking, is there a way to improve that landscape? What can be done? And this is just me. What can possibly be done that you can squeeze another dollar out of it? Can you make it more suitable for wildlife? And can it be done in a way that it's self-sustaining so that when you put an input in, or if I put an input in, I do it one time and I'm not having to go back and do it again. And at some time with Jonah, the way I do it is not always the cheapest. A lot of times my upfront costs are greater than, say, some of the other energy companies. But the long-term objective for me is I don't have to go in and continually put more money in. And the economics down the road pay out, and that's where I get a lot of support from Jonah. Now, one of my turning points, like one of the defining points in my career, came when I was right here at the University of Wyoming. And at the time, I didn't know that. But I can look back on it now and say that that was a point that has led me to where I am. I can also say that right now, if I look back and would I change anything, I would say no, because everything has led me to where I am right now. And if I changed something back then, God knows where I would be now. But that turning point here at UW came in rangeland plants and ecosystems. So I'd been in this class for a few weeks. And the professor, his name was Dan Rogers, came up to me after one of our tests. He's like, Josh, you want to be on the plant team? I'm like, Jesus, a plant team? I mean, there's a basketball team and there's a football team. What in the hell is a plant team? So he goes, well, we go to these competitions and you ID plants and whatnot. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'd rather hit my thumb with a hammer. But I was a little more political. I was like, well, I appreciate it, Dan, but I think I might pass. And I was walking out the door, and Dan goes, we're going to Hawaii in February. And I stopped. I said, tell me a little more about this plant team. So from there, I did the plant team. I wasn't very good or whatnot, but from there I did internships with the U.S. Forest Service. I continued my education at Wyoming. I got the master's degree at Texas A&M in rangeland, and I did basically, from that moment with the plant team, I did a focus on rangelands, and that's kind of how I got to be where I am now. I have an ag background working in the energy industry, and maybe that's how I ended up right up here. But anyway, off to you, Brian.
Thank you, guys. Let's come back to Tim. We'll start on our questions. Clearly a diverse panel with a lot of interesting backgrounds and experience. From your perspective, what does successful reclamation or restoration look like? That's kind of a loaded question, so I'm just going to turn that over to you guys.
Thanks, Brian. Well, it's all defined by your goal setting. I mean, you can easily achieve reclamation, restoration goals if your goals are simple. If you want soil stabilization and you want to limit infiltration, that's a very different set of goals than if you want to have forage cover, wildlife availability, and cultural uses. And so that is also defined by each individual's mindset. So we talked early in the ethics part this morning about upfront conversations and how they pay dividends. So whenever you're undertaking a project, pulling in all of the people that are going to be working on this project, that are stakeholders in this project, understanding what everyone expects, and maybe tempering those expectations, but coming up to that as a joint decision about where you're going to be. And so that's I think really critical for me, is to make sure that we have those conversations. And then I guess on the other side of it is, are you actually monitoring to find out if you've achieved those? And there's a lot of different ways to do that monitoring. And if you set it up right from the front end, you're collecting the same data throughout the entire process, and it allows you to really be able to understand where you're going, as well as how you might be able to improve on that process into the future.
Thank you. Josh Oakleaf is a super brave man. He gave me complete discretion on his slides, so he doesn't even know what's coming up. It's kind of like Christopher Columbus slideshow presentation. He'll discover it as it comes. So here you go. There's one.
Hey, all right. That looks familiar. All right. So successful reclamation to the Abandoned Mineland Division. First of all, we show up to a site, and there are sites that were mined pre-environmental law, which was environmental law started for our division with the Surface Mining Reclamation and Control Act of 1977. And so we show up to landscapes forgotten by time and by man. And I like to explain it to folks that if you can visualize the surface of the moon, they have more visual characteristics similar to the moon and more geochemical characteristics to Mars. And we get to have the challenge of showing up and bringing that back to productive rangeland. So in AML, we have 4 main priorities, and I really get excited when I get to combine all those priorities into one project. And the 4 priorities reduced format because they're rather lengthy, but that is reduce hazards, reduce environmental degradation, restore ecosystem services, and maintain and enhance sage-grouse habitat. And as a Wyomingite and an outdoor enthusiast, I know that when I'm restoring sage-grouse habitat, I'm also restoring habitat for the 349 other species that we love in Wyoming. And that's the gold standard for me. And when we can do that and we accomplish that, I am super happy. And so that's kind of how I approach most of my projects. And I get to bring together, I get to go and find gentlemen like Tim and Grayson and Josh and bring them together as a team. And then I get to ask them, who's the smartest person you know that's smarter than you and what you're specialized in? And I'm like, go get that person. And so I'm usually the dullest bulb in the box by that time, and that's exactly where I want to be. So that's how we approach it. To Thorson or Grace?
Let's head on down to Josh.
I got to look at the slides too because it's been a bad minute since I sent them in. Anyway, for me, for successful reclamation, for me to achieve successful reclamation, the first thing I have to do is I have to understand the environment that I'm going in. I have to understand what is the existing landscape that I'm going in, what are the soils, what's the growing season. I need to know everything I can about the undisturbed landscape that I'm going into. Then, what are the uses on it? What are the pressures? So is it a landscape that there is only wildlife, so the only pressure in it is wildlife? Or are there other pressures such as is there livestock, is there grazing, recreation? Are other people doing it? So what stresses is that landscape subject to? And then I utilize the ESDs. Now, I don't utilize them as say like the gospel or they are completely accurate because there are some ESDs on the Jonah field that were done quite a few years ago, and just say they're the Wind River Clay or the Wind River Loamy 7 to 9. Well, in all the infinite wisdom of the federal government, they came out with some provisional ESDs in 2015. And they said that all of a sudden my precipitation range is 9 to 12. Well, I've had rain gauges out in the Jonah field ever since I've been there. And in the entire time, I've never had 9 inches of precipitation. So if I try and plant vegetation that requires 9 to 12 inches of precipitation into something that I have never had over 9 inches of precipitation, I'm going to have failure. So I utilize ESDs to give me an idea as to what the potential may be, but I need to understand the landscape before I can be successful in reclaiming it. And do I have one more slide or not?
I think yes.
Yes. So then I compare what I have reclaimed to what is the existing. So the picture on the right is a gas well that we have reclaimed. The picture on the left is the undisturbed landscape. I view, and we monitor, and I see how is the vegetation doing compared to the existing. And if I can show that our species richness is greater, our forage availability is greater, and our ground cover is greater than the undisturbed landscape, I consider that successful landscape. And for me, that holds true both on the public lands that we work on, say here in Wyoming, as well as the South Texas rangelands that I work on down there. In all cases, if I can benefit wildlife and agriculture through our reclamation and restoration habitats and have it be a self-sustaining landscape, I consider that success.
Thank you. Come on down to Grayson.
Yeah, for us, it's converting a liability into an asset. So as I mentioned earlier, there's 15,000 associated sites with uranium waste throughout the western United States. Out of that, there's several Superfund sites on tribal lands, but the vast majority of these sites have no funding mechanism to clean them up. And so, getting into a little bit of the context during the Cold War, the U.S. government said we need as much uranium as possible to beat the Russians. So the Atomic Energy Commission was setting really high offtake agreements for uranium. There were not any bonding requirements, not a lot of regulations until the early 1980s. And so there was a lot of sites that were mined. The economic material was taken to a uranium mill and then eventually used as part of the nuclear arsenal and also eventually for nuclear fuel. But the low-grade, uneconomic material that was mined out of the ground was just left on the surface. And so for almost all these sites, they've been sitting on the surface for 40-plus years. The problem is when that material oxidizes, the uranium leaches into the waterways, dust particles can blow into population centers. But without any funding and without an innovative solution, it's just going to continue to sit there. So what we're able to do, and you can see in this image, a lot of these waste piles have a really soft mineral patina coating, which is in red, carnotite mineral, which is relatively soft in the Mohs scale hardness of 2 to 3. And that's where all your uranium, radium-226, vanadium, other constituents of concern is located. And then that covers an underlying quartz mineral, which is a 7 on the Mohs scale hardness, so significantly harder, and that's benign. So we're able to shoot those particles together, remove that mineral patina coating, and then separate the fines from the clean sand just by simple size classification, where we can upgrade the uranium, typically anywhere from 300 to 600%, in just 20% of the overall volume. And especially like for CERCLA and other cleanup actions, waste minimization is always a key tenet. And so we're able to minimize the amount of waste by over 80%, recovering all the constituents of concern plus uranium to, in most cases, economic grade. So now that uranium is on par with what a conventional uranium mine in the US is about 0.2%. Most of these waste piles are around anywhere from 0.03 to 0.1%. So we get an upgrade to where it can be recycled productively. And so those proceeds from the remediation activities help pay for the cleanup itself. And so, with this current administration, this has been a major focus. How can we recover critical minerals from existing tailings piles, waste piles, and then also do remediation work at the same time. So it wasn't an easy journey for us to get here. When we first wanted to do this activity, we went to the state of Colorado and said, can we have a license to clean up these sites and recover the uranium? And they said, well, because you're concentrating uranium, that constitutes milling under the 1954 Atomic Energy Act, without getting too much in the weeds. And basically, that would require a license for every single site, of which there are thousands. And those licenses take several years and cost millions of dollars. So we said, well, that's never going to happen. So take it up with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is what they told me. So we went and did that. NRC staff said the same thing, that they were going to regulate us on our milling framework. And then we had to go to the commissioners themselves, ask for them to provide guidance and update the regulations so that we could be able to go and be regulated under a more workable regulatory model. And eventually, last year, we were issued a first-of-a-kind license from the NRC that treats us as a service provider's license, which allows us to efficiently and timely go after these sites. And so with that comes a lot of stringent conditions that we have to meet. For example, on these sites, you have to restore to what's called NRC unrestricted release criteria. And so that's 25 millirem per annum that we have to return to remove the radioactivity from these waste piles. So now people can camp, you can build houses on these lands, and restore to productive use. Because right now it's just a massive pile of rocks that is of no benefit to anybody. And then most of these sites are on federal land, so we're dealing with the BLM in a lot of cases, in some cases the Forest Service, and then the respective states as well. So there's a lot of site packages and conditions, and then once we engage in the cleanup, we can demonstrate that we've removed all those constituents of concern to adequate cleanup levels. Then we have to go into a restoration period where we have to revegetate the area, put it back to what it looked like before this material was left on the surface after it was mined out. So, but for us, it's how can we look at not these sites not as liabilities but as assets, where we can recycle the uranium, put it to productive use, especially in the United States. We import almost 99% of our uranium. So the US consumes about 56 million pounds of uranium a year. That number is going to double in the next 15 years. In the last several years, we've produced less than 1 million pounds of uranium. So we are not in a good state. As a country, our supply chains are quite weak for uranium. And so we're hoping we can play a role in helping domesticate our critical mineral resources by adding a new supply of uranium to meet domestic demand.
Quite literally reclaiming something useful out of something that was considered waste prior to that. Yeah, that's great. So we're going to go to our next question. We're going to start with Josh Oakleaf. What are the biggest technical or logistical challenges that you encountered during site cleanup or reclamation, and how often do things like cost, time, or regulatory constraints shape the final outcome?
What kind of slide do you got for me, Brian?
Let's see, for you, let's go with that one.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, so there's obviously engineered solutions and technical details that math wizards and engineers can work out. But when it comes to getting the icing on the cake and getting your seed down to the soil, when the seed hits the soil, that's what I've found to be one of the hardest things to get right. It's at the end of a project. Everyone is tired. It's hunting season. and we're trying to get the project all wrapped up in a bow on top. Well, I like to say that you could get the world's foremost renowned ecological restorationist to design a vegetation plan, and by the time it went through all those real world breaking points, they would not get the outcomes that they thought they were going to. And so through my time with AML, I remember when I first started, I'd make the best seed mix in the world, and I knew it was gonna grow the best vegetation community out there. And all the charismatic megafauna was gonna be hanging out on our reclamation. And I'd show up on site so disappointed. And so I went, and I just started through the years just recording every spot where my design and my plan failed, and recording them and implementing QA/QC protocols to control them better so that we would standardize our approach so that we could measure our inputs and measure our outcomes. And so I think that's one thing that I've really taken home is like really implementing the QA/QC and making sure you do everything the best you can, even when you're tired. Oh, hey, thanks, Brian. So I'm pretty excited about this seed mix. That's a seed mix that I'm getting ready to put down out in Shirley Basin, and it has a whole lot of diversity, and there's several cultivars for each species that we're putting down. And you can see we keep grass numbers low, forbs high, and an astute observer might notice that we're seeding sagebrush at about 4 pounds, 5 pounds of pure live seed per acre. And that's tilting or flipping the script of determining the outcomes on our site. So I'm trying to get and grow sage grouse habitat, and in order to do that, I need a sagebrush canopy cover of 20%. So with seed mix like this, we're starting to see sagebrush canopy cover approaching 5% within 5 years, and so that's a really good trajectory that I can walk away from a site and know that sage grouse are going to be in there. You might also notice that we know exactly the number of pure live seeds per square foot we're putting down. We put it through the proper hopper boxes and plant the right seed at the right depth in the soil profile and use carrier agents, and we all do it at the optimal time to seed, in my opinion, in the West is a dormant fall seeding. And that gives your forb species and your shrub species to have a cool stratification and take advantage of the spring moisture that's here in Wyoming. And so this is one seed mix that I'm pretty excited to apply to the landscape. And we applied one similar to the house draw fire this winter where we seeded 2,000 acres through a drill hopper box. And it was quite similar to this. We tried to seed some grasses that have dropped out of the suspension through time, and then high on the sagebrush. And I don't know how many bulk pounds of sagebrush seed we put out in the house draw fire in the last 2 years, but I think somewhere approaching 80,000 bulk pounds of sagebrush seed. And I actually was out there last Friday, Brian, and got some snapshots of some nice sage moving in from our efforts.
Excellent.
Yep.
Challenges. So there are environmental challenges. I can do everything right, and if it doesn't rain, it looks like I don't know what I'm doing. Conversely, I can do everything wrong, and if it rains consistently throughout the growing season, I look like a wizard. But I have no control over that. The only control I have over the environmental part is plant native vegetation that is suitable to the habitat that I'm trying to plant it in. Because if I'm doing that, then I am planting vegetation that is, adapted to the harsh environment and conditions that we are in. Mainly the challenges that I deal with involve people. And that can be both regulatory and administrative. Now, if you look at those pictures, those locations or those roads are only about 200 yards apart from each other. You can see that there's a power line up there. That power line is a boundary. Both locations were disturbed in the same year. The dirt work for reclamation was done within a few days of itself, and they were both planted at the same time. But there is a boundary there, and that boundary is right around where the power line is, where on the one side, on the top left, that administrative unit allowed the vegetation to gain hold, allowed the system to work. The other one, the one on the right, that was from a different unit, and after the first growing season, they said, there's too many weeds, you gotta go spray it. So, Joan Energy went and sprayed it. Then a few years later, that same administrative unit came up and said, there's still too many weeds, you gotta spray it again. The difference was, the field office to the north allowed the vegetation to become established, realizing that in Wyoming, reclamation is not successful on year 1 or year 2. The other one, after the first growing season, they said there was too many weeds. Well, it takes native vegetation a little while to outcompete the undesirable species, and it will outcompete them. You just need to give it time. Now, and even if you put the appropriate amount of herbicide down, it can still have an adverse effect on your desirable vegetation. Had the administrative unit on that one side allowed the vegetation to become established, both of those roads would have been successfully reclaimed. As it is, one is reclaimed, one isn't. So when that administrative unit came out to me a couple years ago and said, we need you to spray this, I said, come out and look at this. Look at both of these roads. One, we allowed the vegetation to become established, and the other, you have told me to continually spray. Let nature do its work. It will take care of itself. So, my biggest challenges are people.
Let's come back down to Grayson. Grayson talked a little bit about some resistance that they ran into initially from regulatory stuff, but I'm sure there's others as well.
Yeah, we've got challenges on all the items that you listed there, Brian. To start on the logistical challenge, the fact that there are thousands of sites and there hasn't really been done much work been done on these sites. When we first decided to go after and tackle this problem, the U.S. government has a database of the location of all these sites, but it doesn't tell us how big the sites are, what the contamination levels are in these sites. And so what we've done as a team is we've created a proprietary GIS database to map out all the different sites. We'll vet it. Some of these are old copper tailings. They're not even uranium waste rock piles. Some of it's just overburden. Like the US EPA estimates there could be as high as 8 billion tons of overburden material, but a lot of that's just rock. Probably less than a majority of that actually has, sufficient quantities of radioactive contamination. And so once we identify that this is actually an abandoned mine waste pile, then what we'll do is do walkover gamma scans and say, okay, yep, this is X amount above background, so there's definitely uranium in here and radium-226. And then from there, we'll figure out who owns the site. And so a lot of these sites are owned by different mining companies who have different claims and leases, and they don't even know that they own that these waste piles are sitting there. And so we'll say, hey, we'll clean this up for you for free. We'll give you a royalty from any of the revenues that we generate from recycling the material. And they're like, yep, that's, sounds like a great deal to us. And then others, nobody owns it, and so we'll stake a claim. And then so once we do that, then we need to prioritize what the biggest sites are, how we're going to, which ones are economic and have the highest, net present value. And then additionally, our units are mobile, so there's a lot of movement going. How do we mobilize the units? How do we get the right testing with our units? Because there's a lot of variables we can play with our technology. In mining, you typically look at grades, recovery, and mass pull. And so, you can get higher mass pull, but then you're gonna, and higher recoveries. But when you sacrifice your mass pull, that means now, you're only minimizing maybe 50% of the waste, and you still have to haul 50% of the waste off site. Because what's great about our technology is the fact that we can move it mobile to these sites. Now, when you have to take it to a uranium mill to be converted to U3O8, you only have to transport 20% of the material to that mill, and you have to only process 20% of that material, and then there's 20% less, 80% less that goes into the tailings pond. So by pre-concentrating, it's a huge step. So there's a lot of optimization on how the technology works in and of itself. And then once you determine what site you want to go to, then you have to notify the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which, they committed to a 90-day process for review. Our first 2 site packages were submitted 2 months ago, so we'll see if they meet the time promise on that. But there's a lot of different questions and back and forth. And then we were kind of frustrated with when we did our NRC license, we had to go through a full environmental assessment. There was a finding of no significant impact on our activities. And in fact, in that FONSI, it said, by cleaning up these sites in this manner, you're only making the site better. But lo and behold, because we're recovering minerals, we're subject to the 1872 mining law. And then the BLM says, well, because you're subject to the 1872 mining law, now you need to put together a plan of operations. We're like, well, we have to do all that for the NRC. It's extremely redundant. And so we're working through that. Fortunately, Secretary Burgum signed a Secretarial Order 3436 last year that addresses this problem specifically and streamlines permitting for recovery of uranium out of waste piles. But there's still room to go. And then in addition, you have to obtain those state permits too. So there's a lot of challenges in sequencing how the permits are going to be done, a lot of back and forth. Because this is a new way to address the cleanup, there's a lot of questions and a lot of learning on the fly. And then, politically, when you're dealing with uranium, there's always a lot of questions, and it's, a bit of a sensitive topic. So, yeah, I would say, there's a lot of challenges. So, but yeah, mostly like the regulatory streamlining has been improved significantly in the last year, which has been very helpful. There's still a lot more progress that can be made, and so we're very hopeful for that. And then it's just a matter of logistics because the problem is massive.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go all the way down to Josh Sorensen for the next one. How are advances in science, engineering, or regulatory? Oh, do we miss Tim? Oh, come back. I'm sorry. My apologies, Tim.
I thought I escaped that one. No, I've got a few things to share. So I mentioned at the offset that a lot of what we work in is under the Superfund CERCLA, established in 1981. So a lot of our challenges are that I think human nature says you tackle the easy things first, and where we are 45 years later is a lot of the more challenging sites to work on. More difficult to characterize, more difficult to come up with those remedial action plans. And thus more difficult for us to identify what natural resource damages are associated with these. So I find that is, I don't know, almost, I like that part of the challenge is because we got more to work through and it's harder to do, but it's more rewarding from that. Grayson, you mentioned the streamlining permitting secretarial order. That's something else that I see has been an issue with us is that some of the regulations under CERCLA they're written in 1981. They're written in not very plain speak. So that makes it more difficult to work through. Additionally, there's some portions of it that relate to natural resource damage assessment that are no longer relevant. They're written on, they're dictated that we follow the software program that runs on an operating system that no longer exists. So we have been working for the last few years to update those regulations, and the streamlining permitting and streamlining decision making we've gotten a lot of support from this administration to go forth, and we're getting close to being able to do that. And that comes from others pointing out to us regulatory hurdles that we were putting in front of them. And there was a federal advisory committee that was convened on natural resource damages about 10 years ago, and we're taking those recommendations to make it easier to go through this process. So I'm really happy to be able to report on that. And the one other challenge I wanted to point out is that we program a lot of money towards restoration every year because of the settlements that we exist, and we hold in a fund waiting for those right projects to come through. But really, we're a pretty small group at Department of Interior that does this, and we rely heavily on our partners. And these are state partners and tribal partners that are closer to the ground on what needs to be done, as well as our nonprofit and community leaders that identify here are the restoration alternatives that should be considered. I really like what the governor had to say earlier about how do you use common sense NEPA applications. That's something that we're always trying to tackle when we're thinking about what restoration projects that we can do, and use that really as a decision-making tool, not as some way to put up barriers between us. And so working with those partners are really how we find the most success.
Thank you. I apologize for trying to skip over you. It was unintentional. So, Josh Sorensen, how are advances in science, engineering, or regulatory policy changing the way reclamation and Superfund cleanups are approached today compared to 10 years ago?
Well, I have an ag background, so I can't say a whole lot about science or stuff like that. But we've been drilling for oil and gas in Wyoming for over 100 years. An emphasis on the Jonah field is within, say, the mid-2000s when the decision was signed, was to do an emphasis on environmental ethics. Now, with oil and gas, it's all about making money. And in the mid-2000s, when the Jonah was approved, they weren't really sure how to be successful on the reclamation. So they took the shotgun approach. We're making a bunch of money. Let's just try everything we can think of. So top right corner is the shotgun approach. The stuff in the bullseye is what worked. The stuff on the outside of the bullseye is what maybe didn't work. But we were making a lot of money. The emphasis now is to still keep making money, but to implement practices for habitat restoration that are successful. Hence, the figure on the left, which is the bullseye. We are eliminating those practices that didn't work. So, looking back at some of the practices that we did in the mid-2000s, I'm like, holy smokes, I can't believe we even considered that. And that cost a lot of money. With, say, roughly $2.25 gas. If we tried to keep doing everything that we possibly could, we'd be bankrupt. So we focus on what works. We are continually trying to improve our practices. Just because we may be successful in some aspect does not mean that we cannot continually improve upon our practices. We can still make it, we can still ensure success, we can still improve our economics on achieving that success. So our emphasis is, and our improvements are, eliminate the stuff that doesn't work and focus on what works and continually trying to make improvements on that.
Thank you. Down to Grayson.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about our work that's on federal lands. And so in one category that I haven't touched upon that's relevant to this question is our work on Superfund sites. So in addition to the NRC, BLM, state agencies that we have to work through on Superfund sites, those are under the jurisdiction of the US EPA. On the Navajo Nation, there are 523 abandoned uranium mines that are all Superfund sites. And then the Laguna Pueblo, which is just a few hours away from the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, has the largest abandoned uranium mine site called the Jack Pile Pewate mine on it. And so the EPA oversees all the cleanup for that. So over a decade ago, there were significant settlements on the Navajo Nation for these PRPs that either acquired a company or were directly responsible for mining back in the day. And to help out with the cleanup on the Navajo Nation. Unfortunately, those funds have largely just been sitting in a settlement account for over a decade now. And the problem is that there really aren't a lot of solutions. So it sounds kind of funny, but in every site the EPA assesses, they have to do these evaluation economic cost analysis reports. They basically just give the options of how to address it. Option number one is always do nothing, because it's the cheapest, it's the easiest option. Option number two is bury all the material on site. For the Navajo Nation, they're like, we think 9 generations deep. These caps will erode, over 75 years or a little bit longer, and that material can still leach into our waterways. So that's not an option. And then option 3 is to haul all the material off site. But when you're dealing with literally mountains of material, that's way too expensive. The Deer Trail's disposal facility in Denver or out in Colorado only has 4 million tons of capacity, and some of these sites are almost that size of volume. So really that's why there hasn't been a lot of movement. And so where we come in and what the director of the Navajo Nation EPA and the president of Navajo Nation calls our technology is a remedy optimizing solution, because that key tenet of CIRCLA that I mentioned is waste minimization often gets forgotten. So if you can eliminate the leachability and keep material on site while removing all those most harmful constituents, that's a win. And so in 2022, we've been working on the Navajo Nation since 2019, and we had some really positive test results. They asked us to come in 2022 to go to 3 different sites and they wanted to know like how effective is this technology, how economic is it, and does it work on a wide variety of materials. And so what this chart just shows is, what you can see is in green is the uranium, what's in gray is the overall mass, but that's what the material looks like before if you were to separate it by size, and then afterwards. So we're effectively able, on average, that study found we recover over 90% of the uranium and radium-226 into that fine fraction, into 15% in the sample of the overall material. So now only 15% of the material has to go off-site. And then in certain cases, that materials of high enough grade uranium or can actually be economic and actively recovered. So we're super excited this year. We're going to be deploying our technology for time critical removal action for a site on the Navajo Nation, which will be one of the first cleanups on the Navajo Nation in history. And so I think, the EPA's, at first, I think, they were kind of going down their pathway, but I think there's a lot more openness to innovation and to assess different opportunities. For example, Lee Zeldin came here to Wyoming actually, and we had the opportunity to meet with him and to discuss this with the Navajo Nation leadership. And they're taking a very serious look at how can we use improvements in science and engineering to tackle these problems, because just burying the material offsite or hauling it all offsite, is not going to work in a lot of cases, especially when dealing with abandoned uranium mine waste. And then this just gives the key highlights. But when we're addressing abandoned uranium mine cleanup, there's really two different things that you look at. One is leachability, and the second is toxicity. So the toxicity is basically removing all the uranium and radium-226 from that material, and then the leachability, like on these sites that we went to on the Navajo Nation, as it currently sits. Some of this material is 20, 30 times above safe drinking water standard. And what we're able to do, because we can break off that mineral patina coating and recover the radium and uranium, all the material that's left on site is no longer leachable. So, which means that it's no longer, if that material sits on the surface, no longer a threat to the groundwater for people to drink. And like on the Navajo Nation, significantly higher rates of cancer, kidney failure, babies, they did a birth cohort study where babies were being born with uranium in their DNA. So it's a very profound issue, and we go down there, the stories are incredible. And so by being able to assure folks and using science and transparency that we can fully eliminate that leachability problem is very encouraging.
So I guess building off a little bit of what I shared previously, a lot of our sites are pretty complicated, and they often involved multiple potentially responsible parties. So these are some of those difficult sites that have been hard to figure out, well, who is responsible? How do you allocate that responsibility? And using new GIS tools has really been great for us. So we have data that we can use, but it's difficult for our brains to comprehend things sometimes. And being able to more accurately map these, understand how those thresholds change, being able to collect data still to this day, compare it to past data, and utilizing artificial intelligence to help us with that has been, we're starting to make some progress on a lot of those more difficult cases. Kind of building off of some of the session from earlier, using unmanned aerial systems has been a really big use for us in our restoration planning. Being able to fly over a potential restoration site, identify what exists there, what are some of the challenges, maybe mapping out some invasive populations that we weren't aware of, coming up with what the treatments would be, and then flying over those same areas through implementation, through monitoring, not only gives us great data to be able to understand whether we're being successful, whether we need to make any changes to our management approach, but also is a really great telegraphic story about how did we do this, how are we improving things for the community that we're working in, and how do we make sure that what we did was effective. So, and I guess I'll mention a couple other things. We have invested in environmental DNA. We're helping our USGS partners, funding them to be able to figure out some of that information that allows us to just collect a water sample and identify whether there are an endangered species in this water body. There's all of these increased techniques that can be applied to what we do, and that a lot of what we end up with is a negotiated settlement. So being able to provide that information to the responsible party, to our co-trustees, allows us to get closer to that negotiation, rather than each side standing on opposite ends saying, well, my position is this.
Yeah, one thing I find fascinating about the reclamation field is it's a relatively new science. Quite literally, my mentors wrote the book, and they went from slide rulers and T-squares to computer modeling and GIS software. Oh, this is a pretty interesting slide. I'm working with the sage-grouse biologist, Chris Carroll, to reproduce sage-grouse nesting habitat. And so we're able to computer model and design abiotic landscapes out on our reclamation sites. And it turns out that sage-grouse prefer to nest, about 98% of sage-grouse will nest mid-slope and on slopes under 7%. And most of them are on certain aspects. We can actually recreate that in the landscapes by using computer modeling and design software. And so, oh yeah, can you go ahead and click on that square and see if I don't break our presentation? I'm pretty good at breaking presentations. No, the main picture. Oh, see, I did it again. That's all right. Anyways, what you see right there is part of a model of a habitat suitability index. And we're able to actually use GIS to model the most likely places where we should target our restoration and reclamation efforts. And so we can put high dollar inputs in high value ecological landscapes. And I'll pass it on since we're lowering on time.
Well, we got extra time. I don't know how we want to. Oh, we're gonna go ahead and break early. Okay. So let's see. We'll come back to Grayson here for our final question. How do agencies or companies address long-term monitoring, maintenance, and liability after reclamation is complete? You talked about the need to restore some of those sites already.
Yeah, and with the EPA, the EPA has that oversight with the PRP, and really our goal is just to eliminate that leachability, so it's no longer an issue. And so, after every cleanup and even during the cleanup, you're constantly taking samples to show that you're achieving those cleanup standards. On sites that are not super fun, our focus, we have to post a bond on every site, and again, there's a post mobilization notification that we have to provide to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so if we don't meet those certain cleanup standards and can't show through TCLP, SPLP, and different ICP testing on the grades and amount of uranium that we're able to extract from that site, you're going to forfeit your bond, or you're going to have to blend different soil. So that's why before we go in, a lot of it's on the pre-planning to know that we're going to be successful in the cleanup before we even engage. And then once we clean up, we have to do vegetation. For us, it's quite straightforward. It's just planting various seeds and monitoring that. So with the RNRC work, it's not 20 years that we're on the hook for. You can show immediately through these TCLP and SPLP tests that we've achieved that cleanup standard, and then that agency is satisfied that that site's been adequately restored.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is pretty integral to what we do. As we plan a project, we're typically planning to spend about 90% of our settlement on the restoration, leaving 10% for adaptive management, for monitoring, and so that it's pretty important for us to be able to do both of those things. I'd say that number changes a little bit based off of what is the percent design of our restoration project. and what is the risk associated with this, where we'll hold back a little bit more of that contingency funds. But it's really coming up with that adaptive management plan, understanding what the thresholds are, and making sure that we can quickly go out and implement those actions.
You didn't have any
Apparently not.
trick slides for me?
No.
All right. Well, I think one pretty interesting way that we're doing some ecological monitoring that's additional to the standard thing is we're using acoustic monitoring traps. So where you can monitor the sound and the vocalizations of migratory bird species that are sagebrush obligate. And so we can go from 0 to all the sagebrush obligate species. And that's pretty fascinating. I got a team of people working at it, and I'd love to talk to you more about it.
For me, monitoring is not the most exciting part of my job. Not even close. I enjoy the equipment. I enjoy working on the landscape. I enjoy restoring the habitat. But at the same time, monitoring is also some of the most important work I do, because it gives me justification for continuing the operations that I am doing. It lets me know what is successful. What should I keep doing? On the Jonah Field, I have over 1,400 locations. I go to all of them every year except one. And that one is 7 miles down a 2-track that's washed out, and it's a train wreck. Now, if they'd let me take a gun out there and do some other things and just spend the day, then I could make it enjoyable going out to that location. But otherwise, the monitoring, like I said, it provides justification for what I'm doing. And for me, it has to be simple enough. It has to be consistent. I have to monitor at the same time every year. If I go out and look at one of my locations and say June of one year, and then the next year I go out and look at it in November, I'm going to have completely different results, because the vegetation is going to be in a drastically different state of growth. It's going to look terribly different. So my monitoring results need to be consistent. I need to monitor at the same time. I need to monitor for attributes that allow me to make decisions. If I go out and I monitor a specific attribute that doesn't give me any information I can use, it's a waste of time. And I need to monitor stuff that gives me information that I can use to make decisions. So in that regard, it is some of the most important part. It allows me to justify what I'm doing. It allows me to be economically consistent and to, say, improve our economics throughout our operations. And that's pretty much it. We're done.
So if you will join me in thanking our panelists one more time. I do think they're going to hang out for a little while, so if you've got additional questions, please feel free to grab one of these gentlemen and bend their ear a little bit, and we're going to move on to the next portion.